What separates a recruiter in general from the top 10% of recruiters is really doing your research, understanding your customer.
Do you have any examples of how AI would really help empower sourcers and recruiters to, find more top technical talent?
ChatGPT will provide a persona of this person's day to day, maybe their name and why their name matters, their work history, their hobbies, where they could have went to school. And that again is saving hours upon hours of time. The faster you move with the candidate experience, the better your chances are of hiring that individual. Our only goal is to get a yes or a no, a decision from the candidate at the very end. If they say yes, fantastic. If they say no, fantastic. We're now in conversation with them. We now have them in our network. They may change their mind 2 weeks from now. Learn as much as you can about the individual's world, and there's a higher likelihood that you'll get in a conversation.
Hey, Henry, I'm really glad to have you on the 11th episode of my podcast. Today, we're going to be diving into your incredible journey from military service or a successful career in technical recruiting, and now the founder of the Talent Roadmap. We'll also explore the intersection of AI and entrepreneurship in the talent space. So I'd love to just jump right in. And thanks for joining the pod.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you having me and excited to kind of share my story and touch base with the audience.
The first question that I really wanted to ask was, when it comes to AI and recruiting, and AI is obviously a hot topic right now, what's the single most important opportunity that companies are overlooking right now?
I think we're using AI wrong, or we're using AI in the wrong space in place of the funnel. We should be going outbound with the AI tools to engage in conversations and then begin to funnel folks into the conversation that way versus, hey, let's open up a job board and expect 1,000 applications and filter from there. And why I think that's important and why we should be looking at that more closely is essentially with all these tools now, we're sourcing and campaign drips and emails and sequences. It's much easier now to have a text-based conversation with candidates in a professional manner with great content. The tools nowadays are pretty incredible. I'm using Juicebox. Shout out to Juicebox for being so thoughtful in just the customer service and the way the application is built. I'm able to target folks and find folks for roles across the entire tech stack, to be quite honest, and conduct campaigns and thoughtful emails and be able to kind of add things into the conversation that typically isn't introduced up front. So what I've been doing lately is creating Notion one-pagers of like your company blurb, if I want to call it that. It's essentially all the information candidates are going to want to know about the company, and how this differs from like a typical landing page or a website is we're able to curate the information that I know they'll want to understand about the company in general. So the stage of the company, funding, co-founders, tech stack, product, how it's going to change, quote unquote, the world. And if we deliver that up front using AI, I think there's going to be a bit of a better relationship between the recruiter candidate exchange onto the hiring managers and the founders.
Got it. So you mentioned shifting job boards to active sourcing. Can you explain or expand upon that a little bit more?
So active sourcing is finding those folks online, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's on Google Scholar, whether it's on Instagram, Dribble, Behance, you name it. There's a bunch of different ways to find folks online specifically for a targeted job search. And that, in a nutshell, that's active sourcing. Finding folks that are a fit for the role that necessarily wouldn't apply to or have the time to apply to roles that are posted online. Now, in doing that, you have to get in contact with the person, obviously find their email, send out a message in regards to what you're looking to kind of gain from the conversation. So essentially sharing information about the company, highlighting the roles that are open, what we're looking for, how much we're looking to pay, and then begin the interviewing process from there. If I am a founder, or if I'm hiring for a set of roles, I want these roles to somehow increase the bottom line or the productivity or efficiency of my company, right? The idea of a company or a business is to generate revenue, become profitable, so on and so forth, provide jobs. Now, if there are a few roles that essentially help my company scale, I want to go search for those type of talents. So if I'm looking for software engineers, marketers, product marketing managers, recruiters in general, I have to create these personas of how this person or this role will fit into my ecosystem in order to scale my company, so to speak.
Is there a difference in the type of quality of the talent that you'd get from active sourcing? Because they're not the ones that are actively necessarily like looking versus people who actually do apply.
The number one challenge that I've seen from job seekers when I was coaching folks for like a year and a half is we just hate applying to roles. That problem stems from the numerous amounts of ATSs that haven't necessarily updated their workflow or their user experience or their customer journey to reflect like modern engagement, right? If I'm going to have to upload my resume and then upload my info, and it takes X amount of time, I'm going to naturally go to a tool that'll do it for me. And it may get messy, right? I may be able to apply to 1,000 jobs, but it doesn't make any sense as far as applying manually nowadays. I've had really high quality hires on both types of searches, right? Or types of strategies, whether we're actively sourcing for folks or inbound. I think what we need to really discover and talk about is timing of the market, timing of the individual's career path. Some folks are just so busy with work that applying to a role is just the last thing they'd want to do if they're currently engaged in a company they love and they're building, or if they're just comfortable. Their lifestyle is essentially, hey, I like working for big tech and checking out at certain hours and having my weekends. I'm not necessarily going to be looking for a startup that's in hyper growth, building the next, solution for infrastructure. So it really all depends. I would suggest just doing both. And if you're going to do both, make the application process so like shockingly easy where you at least capture their profile, their resume, and do the work on the back end to filter through some of the things you're looking for, then reach out to them for a conversation. You can capture great candidates from both methods.
I want to focus a little bit more on like the technical recruiting aspect and your thought process behind some of the things that I've been thinking about. In today's competitive landscape, hiring can be difficult. How can tech companies and recruiters attract the top technical talent when you can't always compete on compensation alone?
It's not necessarily about the comp any longer, and it really never was. Maybe for a brief period of time when things were fluctuating during the pandemic. But now it's like, hey, people just want to be happy and they want to be around folks that they can trust and do good work with. I think like nowadays we're still missing the story. Oftentimes we'll pitch candidates with compensation, benefits, fringe benefits, work culture. That's kind of been rinsed and repeated for the last, we'll say, decade and a half, 15 to 20 years. I think what most folks are looking for are great people to work with. And I can even zero in on what that means. Is the person I'm reporting to going to help me, grow in whatever aspect of my career or personal life? Are the teammates just as passionate as me about solving this problem or creating this product? Compensation is a big deal. Like, make that worthwhile for the folks you're targeting. That shouldn't be a stopper or shouldn't even be a secret. If you're going to have a conversation with a very high quality candidate that's going to meet all your requirements for your business and then essentially take your business to the next level, be flexible with the conversation. And I've met folks that, man, 250K over the compensation band for a similar role nowadays. We'll talk machine learning engineering. 250K over the base salary of what a FANG company would offer. So basically twice the amount for one role. And that's throughout the entire recruiting process. This conversation was happening. And the reason he joined the company was he felt that the founders were well spoken, were able to solve this problem. He wanted to help solve that problem. So we need to spend time on crafting the story of the company. There needs to be a marketing aspect to it, even like a brand persona. Things are changing to where there's so many opportunities out there, opening up and hitting the graveyard to where people are going to be very selective with where they spend their next year. It used to be naturally you stay for a year, get equity, you take off. But even equity is changing. Carta's kind of shifted the way we think about how that operates. In today's market, and I think this has been true for the last decade, is we need to really hone in on what the mission of the company is, the quality of the founders and the first few hires, and the work-life balance is going to be a big difference as well. I think with remote work and hybrid work coming back, people are still going to want to, quote unquote, not burn out, right? We're learning that at any given moment, the job could be one outsourced or no longer available, given the way AI is kind of moving things at a very high rate.
I think that makes sense. The reason why like I thought about this question is because actually I attended the tech comedy show, Socially Inept, the Tech Roast. It's a comedy show, and one of the segments that they had is TC or GTFO. And I'm not in the technical recruiting space, obviously, but that was the theme. And apparently, that's like a kind of a subculture phrase on Blind, right? What they did was they had people come up to the stage, organize themselves by total comp, explain what they did, etc. For some people, it is really important. It is kind of like, it's from what it seems like, a status marker. People would say sometimes, I don't want to date anyone, not to make it personal, but like some people were like, I don't want to date anyone with a lower TC than me. It becomes part of like the identity, right? And so it just makes me think that I think you're right. Like total comp isn't everything, but especially if you're like active sourcing or getting people on LinkedIn, it like you're mentioning, it is table stakes, right? Like that's what you have to like kind of lead in with in order to pique the interest. Like imagine it had to be in the ballpark range, or else it's just really GTFO, right? To a certain degree. Have you ever seen it where someone led with the story first, right? And then the total comp comes after? Like, does it work the opposite way around?
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. I forgot all about that. I was actually sourcing on Blind for quite some time and was reading through all these posts, and it was so comical. I think some of the responses on the TC were essentially like, "Hey, I'm making this amount of money. I'm happy with it because I get to do X, Y, and Z, and my time isn't, spent at work all day." And there's other folks like, "Hey, I'm just coasting, got lucky. Here's my TC." And there was always these like, "No freaking way!" Like people were jumping, like, "There's no way you make that much at this FANG company, and there's no way this FANG company's offering that much equity." I think folks should just send it all in the first email and then let them digest it. The second email may be some current information around a new feature launch. The third email could be a bio on the founder, which I've used recently. And if we assume that people are going to engage or want to be interested, or let's just assume they open the emails and they read all through it. At least you know that they have all the information that they need to make a decision. So your fourth or fifth email could be like, "Hey, look, I've sent you a few emails about this and this. Let's recap what I've shared. Would you be open to having a conversation?" And I think a lot of folks appreciate just the candidness and even like the time spent to create these messaging campaigns. And if done well, I think at the very least, you get someone that knows of you and what you're doing and could maybe refer or keep you in mind. And at the worst, you don't hear from them, right? But I think what we need to focus on is just getting the information out there on what the company does and not relying on folks to look at your website or your LinkedIn company profile or TechCrunch. Having them do that extra additional work to figure out what you're doing and what you're offering, you're going to lose them. But to your question, I treated, so this is just me. I like to share everything in the first message at the surface level, right? Hey, here's the mission of the company. Here are the founders. Here's the compensation. Here's the remote work, the hybrid work or whatever the case may be. If you're interested, let's chat. Or here's my Calendly. Or here's my LinkedIn profile. And I keep those things in there as markers to see if the candidate is interested. If I see them look at my LinkedIn profile, I know they went all the way down at the bottom of my email. If they book a chat on the Calendly, obviously they're interested. Because if I'm going to be reached out to for a role, and this is just me with the things that I've got going on in my life, family, kids, entrepreneurship and fractional work. If the message is really engaging from the hook, I'll read the thing and I'll keep going. And if it feels like a good opportunity, I'll respond back. That's in one email. And there's studies around 3-step sequences, 5-step sequences, 9-step sequences, which kind of relate more to sales, but is also valid in the recruiting space. There's also studies around, if you send the first email from a recruiter, second email from the founder, it kind of creates more of a dynamic conversation rather than just a static recruiting email. I guess TLDR is create an email campaign that gives them all the information across 3 or 4 or 5, whatever emails you want to send. And at the very least, create a one-pager in Notion, share the public link, put Google Analytics behind that to see if folks are opening it. And you have your data on if it's working or not.
I think that makes sense, right? Trying to consolidate everything into kind of one cohesive message at the get-go, and then layering on additional messaging points, afterwards, just depending on whether they open the email or they haven't, right? It almost sounds like this would be a great use case or to use obviously AI or any, MCP, right? Like that has kind of your company's, identity, what they believe in, what kind of how your, let's say, founder would compose a message, right? To make it seem much more personable, and human, just to really streamline kind of that outreach.
Like a lot of conversations are still like discussing volume. How many folks can we reach? How many folks can we send an email out to? Why aren't we finding these candidates? We emailed 1,000 of them, and they have this very generalized, popular framework or software or technology behind them. Why can't we get these in conversations? Well, if you think about it, if you're sending the emails and they look just like every other email from a recruiter or a hiring manager or founder, people are programmed to kind of feel that by opening it really quickly and reading the first couple lines or reading the subject line. And we're not just talking about recruiters from the US and your industry. We're talking about recruiters from the entire world. I'm getting text messages from folks looking to hire me for software engineering roles in Latin America. So we're bombarded with just reach outs. Now, the ones that stand out and are carefully crafted and have some thought behind them, you may get a higher open rate. You may have folks that are thinking to themselves, like, of all the 100 messages I've received in the last quarter, let me respond to this one because I feel like they actually did a better job at providing value for the time I'm spending to read through this. Volume is great for greenfield roles. If you're looking for 10, 20, 30 plus engineers specifically for a platform you're looking to build, fine. That's great. Or a go-to-market role. But the majority of the conversations that I'm having with startup founders, like we need a very specific profile persona person to hire, and we're looking to spend X amount of dollars, and we're looking to go above and beyond to get them on board. That is more of a fine-tuned campaign. And if you look at in comparison, I'll give you LinkedIn, for example. We have all these folks on LinkedIn sharing, here's my coaching program, or here's my 10-step guide to this and that. That has now become a commodity, right? The ones that stand out are now on LinkedIn have their personalized messaging, their story, and they're growing their brands to where people know them. Like Nikki, for example, who I've never met in real life. She's on LinkedIn. She's a sales person, and she started her LinkedIn journey with just posting videos of her work and what she's done and how she's done it, some personal life things. And every time I think of sales, I think of her, regardless of how many folks are on my LinkedIn newsfeed telling me about sales. Now, I share that because if you flip that to a company perspective that's reaching out to a candidate, and if you do it well enough and reach out to enough people, 100, 200 folks that are carefully targeted, now you have this small pool of candidates that have seen your product, seen your story, read through your founder's bio, and now your brand is starting to kind of become, a thing in this universe. And if you're ever on Blind, maybe they'll say something good about you. Say, hey, the TC was X, and it was a fantastic company to work at. That's the end goal, right? Is to make sure that you're paying people fairly and providing a space for them to do good work.
You were talking about obviously reaching out to different types of candidates and talking either with founders or whoever the hiring manager is. Thinking about this a little bit more, obviously setting expectations is critical, right, and crucial. Not everyone's going to have the money of a FANG company. What are your best tips for recruiters to effectively manage hiring manager expectations? The hiring manager may say, like, I really want this type of talent that came from FANG, right? But maybe you're a Series A or Series D company or whatever, right? Like, just doesn't have the same kind of money, or maybe doesn't even know necessarily what to hire for. How do you balance the ideal candidate versus what's truly realistic and obtainable, in the market?
You don't want to lead with, hey, we're this company, we just got this much funding, we're going to be the next unicorn. It's been said, it's been done. You don't want to lead with that type of conversation. You want to say, hey, we want to talk with you. We're building this. We thought you might be a very good fit for what we're looking to do. Let's chat. And that can either be manual scheduling after that or like a Calendly link. But at the very forefront, to ensure this is a fast process, you have to go very slow at first. So calibrating with your hiring team and setting expectations just through the data, through the iterations, doing the market mapping will help accelerate things when you need to send out those messages. So lots of prep on the front end. If you just got seed funding, you want to hire quickly, you want to, there's pressure from, investors. How fast can we get this done and find the right person? And that's what drives the initial interactions with the recruiter or the recruiting process. Let's just go out there and start networking. But there's no planning or preparation that takes place before that. So the difficult part is to really channel your emotions into the preparation piece. And that could be an intake doc of exactly what the founders or the hiring managers looking for. And then asking the follow-up questions like, why is this important? Well, because I need someone with this type of technology because we're building out, I don't know, microservices for this industry. Or like we're doing monolithic code base and we need someone to maintain that while we hire for someone to build out distributed systems. There's a reason behind the calibration in similar fashion to where when you're building a product, there's a reason why you do user research and you do an MVP first, because if it doesn't work the way you want it to work, you can pivot very quickly. So for recruiters that are in the space nowadays, expect that calibration to be 1, 2, or 3 iterations, sometimes even more. I'm going through that right now as I'm sending over candidates to calibrate asynchronously, given a certain profile, given a job description. That's going to evolve over time. So essentially, as you're calibrating, you document everything. Here was version 1 of the ideal candidate. Here's version 2. Here's version 3. Here's the cost behind it. And you get all that data through doing, conducting market research. You can use levels.fyi. You can pull your own reports from ChatGPT. You can use a tool like JuiceBox that has talent insights on where these folks are residing and what the compensation bands look like. All that needs to be packaged and discussed in these intake or calibration meetings, because without that, we're just going to continue to shoot from the hip. And that's not a really good strategy to hire folks, right? So if you can identify what you want initially, do a market map of that, bring back what makes sense, calibrate asynchronously, or if you can, synchronously with the hiring team, and say, okay, cool, these are the profiles that we're targeting. Let's find more of these. Once you reach that limit to where you either have way more than you need, way more candidates than you need, then you can maybe start sending out emails. Or if you get to a point where like you're so niche and specific in your requirements that only 10 folks exist in the region you're looking to hire, you may want to think about plan B. Like, okay, the necessary requirements are, we'll say, these technologies. We can give up on them maybe having product management experience or some other hybrid type of role because we're a startup. It's really taking the time to go through all that first. And once you have that nailed down, and it could just be 80% done, but if it's nailed down, you hit that campaign, 3-step, 5-step, 7-step emails, connect with them on LinkedIn, begin commenting on their posts and creating this whole like messaging campaign about, hey, we want to talk to you.
I'm thinking about the timeline in which this all happens. So it sounds like this happens even before you open the job requisition or starting to do active sourcing. If you can kind of extrapolate kind of the timeline in which you're either revising and also having candidates move through different stages, whether it's a phone interview, actual hiring manager calls, how does that play into the planning or the revisions that are needed as you go through the hiring process?
It does take a lot of prep up front. It varies from company to company, and company size and company structure. But if done correctly, these templates and these processes and these playbooks can be repeated across go to market, which I did. Hired the entire sales team for the SVP of sales, hired for the entire revenue team. It got faster over time because we already proven the system, the process. Coach of the company was like, hey, Henry has built this with engineering. It's the hardest team to hire for. Let's just adopt that for our department and utilize that system to quickly hire for the rest of the company. And what that led to was senior level hiring, VP of design, directors of sales across the board, and a VP of marketing, like 21 days. Industry standard at the time, if you were to work with an agency or just general recruiting practices, is 120 days. That's what they'll tell you. So we shattered that benchmark, like an order of magnitude. 21 days for a VP level hire is unheard of. And that process is still being used at Commuter to this day. But I remember now there was a huge, I want to say 6-month preparation period. And I'll share this quick story at Commuter. When I joined Commuter in January of 2021, I came on board as a senior technical recruiter. And I was working with 3 or 4 different departments: engineering, product, design, I think security. And The hard part is when you're new or you're just jumping on board, you have to build rapport with the hiring team. And I had maybe 6 to 10 hiring managers, all engineering, all product design, security. And the idea there was initially to build trust. And although I did really well in the interviewing process and people might have known of me, I'm still interviewing as in the first week, first month, first year, right? Because my reputation is based on my work and how I kind of provide that service and value add to the company. We didn't begin hiring our first candidate until July, 5 to 6 months, and that entire time I'm having meetings with VPs of engineering, head of product, former CPOs from other companies, enterprise companies that are just joining the startup. And those meetings took a long time because the company was in the middle of understanding the org structure, understanding what the product was, understanding the customer base. And during that time, I just built documentation. I said, hey, look, if we're going to do this and we're going to start hiring folks, we need to really understand where our candidates are coming from. So we got rid of the agencies. We built a referral platform. And really, I honed in on a process with the VP of engineering that I thought was really sound that I can duplicate across his org. Because if he agrees with it, he's going to share that with his entire leadership team. I'm just going to execute on it from my end, update the documentation at Confluence. I created weekly syncs, very repeatable processes where we can async communicate, similar to how they do in building their products. And over the course of 6 months, we built out this entire hiring process end to end, like what my recruiter call looks like, some control flow at the front to where if I felt there was a strong yes from my end on a candidate, I wouldn't even have to ask the hiring team. I would just book it on their calendar, same day or next day, 45 minutes with the hiring manager. So when you cut out that piece, so the 6 month preparation allowed me to build enough trust to make a decision, a very big decision on occupying the time of the hiring manager, with the candidate I thought that was strong. And that was the process. So when the hiring manager was excited about the conversation, we then moved to the next 3 conversations, which was a technical round, like a culture fit and like a system design. That all happened in the same week. Once that was done, we could see the scorecards coming in through Lever. We could see all the notes being funneled in. We could see the decision making happening in flight. So when we had that debrief at the end of the week or midweek or however we scheduled it, we would literally make yes or no decisions on 5 or 6 candidates, extend them offer letters. I think we hired 10 cloud infrastructure engineers in the span of 45 days. The fastest one from my call to offer letter was 9 days.
You doing the pre-planning for 6 months reduce the chances that, hey, once we execute this plan, we are more likely to find the candidate that we're looking for versus like, I know sometimes I've seen cases where there's an interview process, the team isn't really sure they have an idea of what they're looking for, but when the candidates kind of come in, it's a little bit harder to determine like, is this what we're looking for? Do we need to respec the whole job description and basically got to start from the beginning again, which is kind of a bad experience, for a lot of the candidates that you may be putting through, right? Whether it's on phone calls, right? Or having them talk to the hiring manager and then finding out, oh, actually, we don't want to hire anyone because this isn't what we were looking for and we need to go back to the drawing board again. How much does pre-prep cut down the chances of a situation of that happening?
If done correctly, I think it will forecast not opening up the role. So just to clarify, during that 6 month planning process, we're still interviewing folks. And the way we salvaged some of the conversations that didn't move forward quickly was, hey, candidate, we know we want someone of your background. We just don't know what the headcount looks like just yet. I, myself, Henry, I'll be in touch with you every single week as things unfold. I know you're still working at X companies. We're not in a rush, but I just want you to know that we're not deliberately ghosting you. We are working out the kinks on our end. So that was still happening. We were still running processes and interviewing folks. We took a lot of those experiences and realized what to add or what to take away from the overall experience moving forward. I don't know how much time I can save. I think every company really differs. I was recently at a couple of startups where things changed every week at the all hands. So it was kind of interesting on who was up next to the interviewing panel, who is still on the interviewing panel is if the job descriptions change, do we need to add more folks to the interviewing panel? And as you hire new folks, are they part of the interviewing panel? So that was really challenging, but that's going to happen everywhere, right? So I think if you establish like a foundational hiring process and then test and plan for the edge cases, have a real meeting like, hey, this is the candidate we want. If we can't find this candidate, what's plan B? And agree on that. What's plan C? Hopefully there isn't a plan D because that's just way too many, variables and iterations. But map out what the plan is for an A candidate, a B candidate, and forget the C's and D's, like because all you want is a strong yes or a yes, right? Map out those roadmaps, those plans, and know that you're going to hit a roadblock and know there's going to be challenges. People are going to miss interviews. People are going to be traveling to meet clients. Just know that those are going to happen. And just try to adjust fires as best as possible. But you can't do that unless you have an SOP, standard operating procedure, to map out, what could happen next. And you take all this from like recruiters that you hire that have the expertise in this space that have seen it happen, 10 times over to prevent that fire from happening, right? So essentially create a foundational recruiting experience. And you can use AI for this nowadays. It's gonna take you an hour maybe to fine tune it. Agree on that, and then essentially just maybe track the data afterwards. How much time did we spend on planning? How fast was our hiring timeline? And how much spend was that? Given everyone's compensation and put that into a meeting hours book and figure that out from there. It's going to surprise some folks how much time you save in the hiring process when you pre-plan. And the last thing I'll say about this is the faster you move with the candidate experience, the better your chances are of hiring that individual. At the end of the day, I tell folks, our only goal is to get a yes or a no, a decision from the candidate at the very end. If they say yes, fantastic. If they say no, fantastic. We're now in conversation with them. We now have them in our network. They may change their mind 2 weeks from now. But the idea isn't to put all of your emotions into like, we have to hire this person no matter what. People's lives are going to be much more fluid than the role you're hiring for, right? So just expect that to happen. So yeah, I don't know if there's data on that with certain companies and certain sizes. I think there should be. Folks are going to be quite delighted with what they figure out, what they plan enough the hiring process up front.
It makes me think about the Mike Tyson quote, right? You can do a bunch of planning, ahead of time, but when you're in the arena and you get punched in the mouth, then you just have to kind of react to it. I'm guessing it's kind of like that with recruiting sometimes as well. You put the job recs out there, you plan as best as you can, and then it's really how quickly do you adapt to the situation. But I think the plan also helps just to have some foundation to work off of versus kind of just going into chaos, right? And like just purely being reactional.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that too if you'd mentioned. Yeah, just being reactional and just going in without a plan. You're going to start blaming folks. People are going to start pointing fingers like, why did you miss that call? Or why didn't you send your feedback? Or why is this job description outdated? There's no real owners at the very beginning of a process. And once you identify that and you still get punched in the face and react, at least you guys know where to solve the problem, where the punch came from and how to train for that.
One of my next points that I want to talk about was kind of professionalism in the recruiting space. The recruiters, they're like the face, they're actually the face of the company, right? In regards to, reaching out to talent, being approachable, being personable. I've heard that sometimes being quote unquote too professional can make you kind of sound a little bit more stodgy, not really very human, less approachable. So talk about that role in terms of professionalism from a candidate facing point of view and how that impacts your ability to close on a candidate or making sure that the candidate has a consistently positive experience working with the recruiter.
Yeah, I think that varies as well, and I'm gonna say that a lot. If you're an executive, you're gonna want a recruiter or an agency to reach out to you with some professionalism, right? Head of engineering, CTOs, CPOs, folks that are at the peak of their careers, X amount of TC, and you're just really well paid. You're going to assume that going in with a professional tone is going to be your best bet. There's a certain time to be professional. Age who you're talking to. Like if I come in real personal in the conversation, and I'm working at Commure, which is a health tech startup, I kind of want to maybe align more around the seriousness of the product and what we're trying to solve. Because EHRs, EMRs, hospital systems. When I think of that, I think of like helping people and get better in their health or increase their health. But there's also this idea of like those things are broken. So I may not be as outgoing and fun and maybe a bit more like, hey, this is a problem we need to solve. And I've had a personal experience across the health ecosystem through the military, through the VA, through the own private sector. And there's the things that are we really help kind of shape for the future of our generations. So it's a balancing game, right? And I think it's kind of fun to really align yourself with the spirit of the company. Now, maybe you're the type of recruiter that has a reputation, a brand for being a bit more, comical when you reach out to your conversations. Fantastic, that works for you. But I think there's a notion to where oftentimes folks forget that if you're a recruiter for a certain company, and let's just say Crunchyroll, we both work there. I wanted to mirror the culture as much as I could on my call because folks that we were hiring there were really into anime, obviously, really into media, just loved the brand itself. So I did my best to be kind of laid back, conversational, shooting the shit, talking more about hobbies and what we do outside of work, what I do outside of work, and building more of a personal relationship in the very first call. Like I never screened anyone with like a structured, hey, how many years of experience do you have? I would say things along the lines of, hey, I read through your resume. I love this very specific piece that you had at Fandom, or I love your time working at Sega or YouTube. Can we talk about that first? And if you have any questions on the way, I'm an open book. Happy to answer any questions about myself, about Crunchyroll, about the future, our future roadmap. And what that did was it really let down my defenses, their defenses, that we built a ton of rapport in the first call. And that helped me gauge if I think the hiring manager was going to be a yes or a strong yes, and the rest of the team. Right? This is obviously after weeks of calibration and getting to know who I'm working with. And I would make that bet. Like, hey, I had a really great conversation with Mike. You're going to love him for the games team. Next thing you know, Mike is flying through the interviewing process, all because of my edification and my recommendation to move fast.
Talk to me a little bit more about the relationship between recruiters and sourcers and how vital that relationship is. And then how can organizations truly empower their sourcers to build strong talent pipelines while preventing burnout?
Sourcing really stemmed from, I think, big tech. Sourcers would find the candidates from all these databases. Could be inbound, could be active sourcing, could be just all these platforms and tools. And they are essentially engaging with the candidate up front, maybe sharing compensation, culture benefits, hiring guides. Once they've been qualified, pre-qualified to interview, they pass them off to the recruiter, and the recruiter now is managing their entire process to meet with the hiring team. And that's the hiring manager and their peers, maybe some cross-functional stakeholders, and being there at their concierge and their support system throughout. And I think the reason why that was split was essentially there's only so much work an individual can do across the entire recruiting spectrum, right, or life cycle. We're also missing one: coordination. Recruiting coordinators essentially are the ones managing schedules. And it may sound super simple, but like, hey, there's Calendly nowadays, or there's other tools you can kind of use to self-schedule. But there's also a human component. Like, how many folks actually I can actually share with you? There's oftentimes I'd have to follow up with folks even after sending a Calendly because time in a day, and if you're able to kind of schedule on your own or whatnot. So having a recruiting coordinator or some sort of individual in the operations piece continue to connect the dots on folks actually meeting is huge. I think you can jump into your career just as a recruiter in the right company. So Crunchyroll, I came in as a recruiter, but there was an expectation to source for candidates as well. Small enough company, you can do both roles. But as companies grow, you're going to need, and you're continuing to hire for like a greenfield role in software engineering and product and customer service, maybe. You need someone to actively keep that database healthy and alive and full of folks that are actively looking or could be passively looking, and you reconnect every month, every 3 months. So that would be, in my mind, an ideal sourcer job is to kind of maintain top of funnel, what do you call it, referral base, active database of folks in your community, and then hand off to the recruiter to kind of make the rest of the process as seamless as possible. So recruiting coordinators, sources, and recruiters themselves That sometimes could be a one person job in an early stage startup. And if you're operating in that capacity, that can also extend into like a head of talent position where you're doing business analytics, you're doing reporting, you're doing talent mapping and marketing, you're doing headcount planning, and you could even be doing some compliance work as well, which is more of a chief people officer. So it fluctuates as the company grows, and it really depends on where you're at in your career. So again, folks can come in as a sourcer, coordinator, or recruiter. But to your point, typically and traditionally, folks would start out as a recruiting coordinator, go into sourcing, understand like kind of their department, the roles that they're trying to fill, study the Boolean searches, study the tools that are out there, study how to correctly message someone with a professional tone or more of a company branded tone. And then you move on to recruiting, which is essentially the first term I heard of 10 years ago was full cycle recruiter, full desk recruiter, which stemmed from the agency world, where you're doing everything. You're even, you're gathering clients and you're finding candidates and you're kind of matching them and marrying them throughout your process.
How do you empower sourcers, right, to do their best work? Oftentimes it's seen kind of as, like you're mentioning, just like the database, talent database management. And I imagine that there are times when, you know, there's a lot of burnout that could potentially happen. So how does a recruiting team give the best organizational setup or the tools to help a sourcer succeed?
I think there's the idea of crawl, walk, run. So you show them the basics, they kind of get in tune with that. Then they start doing it on their own. And then now they're fully fledged, and not just operating without any guidance. So there's a mentorship capacity to it. I think though nowadays we can fast track folks to become really good sourcers with the tools that are available and documentation. Learned this from a gentleman by the name of Parshva Vora. He was a Crunchyroll director of engineering. When he was onboarding new engineers that were remote, it was difficult to kind of find time with them, given all the initiatives that we had going on. So he built a self guided onboarding document for folks to log into their accounts, figure out where the repo lives in GitHub, what the most current product is, current code base, company mission, who to reach out to that are cross-functional stakeholders across the entire company. And that, I think, if we can model that and duplicate that for recruiters and sourcers, you can teach someone to do this at a much faster pace. I wouldn't say overnight. I wouldn't say it's the easiest thing to do, but imagine if there was a handbook that says, hey, here's how to onboard yourself to become a sourcer. Here's the tools you use. Here's the Boolean searches that are tried and true. And here's how you create variables and version 2 through 3 and 4 of this type of workflow, and have them tested in the sandbox. But I think there are tools out nowadays you can just begin to source. Oh, actually, there's a platform. It's called sourcing.games. It's a really fun interactive sourcing game that allows you to understand the thought processes and the methodologies and the strategy around finding folks online. And it takes you from very basic image search using Google, reverse imaging. Then it gets as comprehensive as opening up the code behind a Chrome browser, figure out people's passwords, and some really fun stuff. So I think there are tools out there. It's just when you think of traditional recruiting and sourcing, people like to do it the way they've always done it. Right? Here's a sheet of candidates, most likely on a Google sheet. Let me know what you think. I'll get back to you. For sourcing, I think there are ways to kind of systemize it to where people are aligned across the entire recruiting stack.
I think you highlight a really good point about documentation. I think that spans even just beyond recruiting, whether it's documentation on, onboarding, documentation on just, general processes. Like in general, I think sometimes like not, especially in like marketing orgs or like probably engineering orgs, like less focus on documentation. As you're scaling, you do need documentation, and especially in kind of this AI world, you do need a lot of documentation to provide context to make kind of the best decision possible.
I'm a big believer in documentation. As much work as goes into it, it's slightly painful. But once you get towards the tail end of completing that document, you're like, okay, cool. Now I can just copy and paste this or share this link to anyone that has the same question. And it saves you a bunch of time.
Do you have any examples of how AI would really help empower sourcers and recruiters to, find more top technical talent?
If we take like a job description now from a startup and just throw it in ChatGPT and say, hey, analyze this document, and convert it into a Boolean search string for the role that I'm looking to hire for. 3 seconds later, you get a Boolean search string. Now, what you do with that could be just dumping it into Google and see you can find folks that way, using recruiting.net, which is a public platform, doing that way, or you can just dump it into like a tool like Juicebox. It's a huge leap in what we used to do, which was find the keywords in the resume, or I'm sorry, in the job description, copy and paste that into a search tool, maybe do some Boolean search and functions and or functions and parentheses and double parentheses. And that used to be the holy grail of sourcing, was being able to write out fantastic Boolean search strings. And there are folks out there, like the best of the best, that I've seen at like SourceCon. They'd have pages, like Google Docs, of a single search string for a very specific type of profile in a very specific industry. And we're talking tech, but we're also talking very niche tech and like, hardware or mechanical or robotics or environmental that not many folks talk about because it's not, the big software tech companies. But there are Boolean search strings out there that will hyper target a very specific PhD profile of a doctor who's worked on cutting edge science that isn't even like publicly available yet. If you take that and your first pass is through GPT, then you can say, cool, thanks for the Boolean search string. Can you create a persona of what this person would look like online? When I say look like, I mean just as far as content, not necessarily like an image. And ChatGPT, and I've done this, number of times now, will provide a persona of this person's day to day, maybe their name and why their name matters, their work history, their hobbies, where they could have went to school. And that again is saving hours upon hours of time on, just us humans thinking about where to find these folks. You copy and paste into a Notion doc. Now you have a persona and you have a Boolean search string. You just kind of keep all this stuff documented somewhere outside of ChatGPT. As much as I love these AI tools, it's always nice to have your own space to kind of collect all your information. And then from there, after building the persona, you say, hey, where can I find these folks across the United States, across Latin America? And they will actually give you very specific areas of the world where there's a density of, let's just say, security engineers in the Research Triangle, North Carolina, or Golang developers in Colombia, or I don't know, Java engineers in Mexico, or JavaScript engineers in San Francisco. All that can just be a discussion with ChatGPT. And then whatever you do with that information afterwards is your own sourcing techniques. Do you use Juicebox? Do you use LinkedIn Recruiter? Do you utilize your network? That just kind of becomes your own. But the initial information, which I appreciate this process, I know it's tried and true. Yes, there may be some hallucinations, but what are the chances of it being less accurate than what I've done in the past from just a manual input process? However you get to the end result on finding that specific profile is up to you. But I think the fastest way and most efficient and accurate way is to kind of go through the process I just outlined.
Beyond the basics, what are the key skills and differentiator that elevate a good technical recruiter into a great one, especially when it comes to closing top talent?
What separates a recruiter in general from the top 10% of recruiters is really doing your research, understanding your customer, and providing an experience that is memorable. Right? And it doesn't have to be lead up. It doesn't have to end up with them being hired, but there's folks that I've interfaced with years ago, and we still keep in touch. There was no like end result of getting them hired somewhere or me getting hired somewhere, but there's always that like, hey man, they treated me well during the interviewing process, and vice versa, they were a great candidate. And that's something you can't necessarily duplicate, right, through AI. You have to have these experiences that you create yourself, which then becomes an extension of your brand. So if you want to be great, understand your customer as best as you can. If you can somehow build rapport in tools you've used and technologies you've understood in past work history, and I think a lot of software engineers that become recruiters already have this immediate rapport. Like, hey, I used to be a software engineer. I'm a recruiter now. I've joined the dark side, so to speak, but I'm here to help you type deal. As much as you can understand the individual's world that you're operating in, the better off you'll be. This is just a basic customer service concept, right? So if you're servicing folks in a French restaurant, understand the culture, understand the wines, understand the way the food is delivered and the types of ingredients that go in it. That'll make you probably the top 1% of service in that French restaurant. I'm hiring and I'm searching for engineering, product and design folks. I better understand how engineering, product and design operates within a company, how they interface, how they, work together. And now if I'm going to go super far in the niche and understand and work with and hire AI engineers, I better understand like the forefront and the frontier technologies of LLMs and what's going on there, which I don't have expertise on, by the way, because I don't necessarily want to keep up with that just at this point. But if you're going to do that, learn as much as you can about the individual's world, and there's a higher likelihood that you'll get in a conversation, and at the very least, have a new network connection if they don't want to jump ship yet.
You mentioned your experience in the military, and I wanted to kind of talk about your time in the U.S. Army. How did that experience, including any challenges you faced as a Vietnamese American, shape your approach to entrepreneurship and talent acquisition?
The Army was really fun for me. There were a lot of challenges. I joined as a reservist in 2004. I had the option of being either a chef, watercraft engineer, which was essentially a mechanic, for these Army vessels that are like 174 feet in length. Time in the Army taught me how to be like a hands-on carpenter and just kind of general contractor. What kind of impacted me the most, what I learned that I still utilize to this day, is some of the processes that the Army has in play. And people don't think of the military, and I guess just speak on the Army because that's where I was at, as like a data-driven organization. But man, they are airtight with the requirements that we have to kind of uphold. Right? And I'm not talking about like a discipline. It's like the schools and the documentation and the records you have to upkeep. Those are tracked by the Army and says, hey, you're 30 days late, or you're early, or get this done by this date. And we just have to get it done. And they use all that information to really create what they call a horse blanket in terms of the next year's planning for how the Army's going to operate. And if you break it down from like big Army to general corps and divisions and battalions and so on and so forth, you now have the structure of a tech company. Right? And throughout all these layers, what they taught us was essentially, and this is a carpentry term too, like a measure twice, cut once, or slowest smooth, smoothest fast. And what that really means is understand the foundational aspects of your job, get really good at that, and now you can kind of do that without blinking. Once you move, you now become an expert at that craft, right? You can continue to do that work in any environment, understand some of the edge cases. And the Army had this process of where, even in downtime, you're always checking on your readiness. And there's a term called PMCS, Preventative Maintenance Checks and Services, and this PMCS and inspections or whatever. Even when there wasn't any work to do, we'd always maintain our systems, our equipment, and ensure they were able to be utilized at any given moment. We also did it on ourselves, our physical fitness. We're always checking in on that. We're checking in on our accomplishments and our personal growth. That's all documented. During training missions, there's a pre-planning phase to assess the risk of the likelihood of a trainee being injured or dehydrating, or if there's overcast, what's the likelihood of lightning striking this facility? That's all like pre-planned and prepared and in the entire report before the commander can execute on a training plan. And then even after the training is done and no one gets hurt or injured and things don't go by the wayside, there's what we call a hot wash, is essentially a retrospective, right, in the product world, which is like a mini retro. And then there's like a formal retro, which is called an AAR, after action review, where you actually document what went well, what didn't go well, changes that need to be made, who's responsible. And what does that sound like a retrospective, right? So when I got into tech, I was like, wow, this sounds all so familiar. It's just not as like stiff. You're not having to sit in a row with all your soldiers and have all your gear on and wait for your turn to talk. In tech is essentially that's happening so rapidly. And I think if we can hone in on that, I think there'll be a much better outcome. So the Army taught me that. And I think it's fascinating how us as humans, if we can operate in that type of mindset and within those parameters, get a lot more done, and a lot more folks would be happy about just the process of everything within startups. Funny story about being a Vietnamese American. I grew up, in the Bay Area, pretty diverse. Everyone's kind of the same. And didn't really have any issues. Made a lot of friends, but I will share my story in basic training to where, arriving at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, 2004, July 19th, you meet people from all over across the U.S. and U.S. territories. So when we got there, we were able to kind of have downtime to chat with each other in line or like after the days like onboarding is done. You figure out there's people from places I've never been. So I grew up in Hayward, never really left. until I joined the Army. And then I met folks from like Idaho, Iowa, Texas, American Samoa, in the Bay Area, you know, Wyoming. And there were folks that actually haven't been out of their town and seen a person of my skin color, right? Brown, or haven't met anyone from San Francisco. And the first thing they asked me was, hey, where are you from? I'm like, hey, I'm from the Bay Area. What do you mean by that? Like, oh, San Francisco, Oakland, Hayward. He goes, oh, so are you gay? And I was like, you got to be fucking kidding me, man. He goes, no, man, from what I hear, like everyone from San Francisco's gay. And that was my first interaction with someone who wasn't from the Bay Area that grew up in a small town. And they weren't trying to be offensive. That's just all they knew. So that was my experience, not even as a Vietnamese American, but someone from the Bay Area joining the military. Long story short, it went even as far as like they nicknamed me Hollywood because some of the folks thought that the only thing in California was Hollywood. Like the disconnect there was pretty huge. Didn't really have an issue being Vietnamese American. I think I was able to, just get along with everyone. I was always thinking about how to do things better, which might have been positive impact, but it could have been totally different. But yeah, great experience overall, and I share that story just out of tongue in cheek, right? It was such a surprise to me, but I really enjoyed my time in the service.
Everybody has a different perception of a place that they've never been to. It's the easiest, most accessible thing to kind of attach to. Now, whether people wholeheartedly believe in it and feel very strongly about it, I think that's a whole different story. But I think it's very natural for people to have preconceptions. I don't know if they actually believed it, or they were just kind of joking around about it as just like a common culture kind of understanding within those circles.
Yeah, 100%, man. Absolutely.
What were the top leadership traits that you took away from your time at the Army?
Yeah, I want to say lead by example. That was kind of ingrained in us, whether you were a sergeant or in a leadership position or not. And I think what that meant to me was, just doing the right thing. Like even when you're tired, for me, it felt good to always like, not be on someone's radar. It was actually a stress reliever to do the right thing. If I had to show up and run 4 miles, even after a late night of, hanging out at the club, showing up and doing that actually reduced the amount of stress that I, would hold if I didn't show up and do that. And that might not be the best example, but when I think of the Army and the leadership principles, it really is leading from the front. And I had a sergeant that I met during deployment, and I wasn't the best soldier coming in. I was really lackadaisical. Like I did my things. I wasn't like the most high speed, or I always just try to find a way to have fun. This gentleman was a former Marine. In our first engagement, I remember pinning a new rank on myself because that's what was given to me by the staff, because I spent X amount of time on the reserves and basic training. I just didn't know what the ceremonial procedures were to make that new rank. So I went into the bathroom, put that rank on, came back out. He said, hey, Private No, who authorized you to put that rank on? I'm like, oh, well, it was given to me by this individual. They said I was promoted. So I figured this was the right thing to do. And I was 20 years old at the time. This gentleman was, I think, in his 40s, or almost in his 40s, close to his 40s. And rather than like yelling at me and scolding me then and there for that mistake I made, he very well could have. He pulled me aside and said, hey, look, I know you're fresh out of boot camp. This is the reserves. But typically when you get a new rank, there's a ceremony involved. And he didn't say it like that, all nice and stuff. He was actually pretty like stern about it. He didn't yell at me, like he didn't scold me, but he was serious. And I was like, damn it, I'm gonna spend a year with this guy. He's so like strict, he's so like not fun. But the next day before we stepped out for like training, they put a ceremony on for me. And I was like, wow, this is pretty special. Thanks, man. Like, so for him to like not be the ideal leader for me in my mind at the time, he actually became the best leader that I had, because day in and day out, he made sure that I was given the right training, the right environment, the right set of requirements to succeed. And I didn't know it at the time. I just thought like, hey, the Army's fun. I made it past boot camp. This is easy. But he put things in front of me that challenged me, helped me become a faster runner, to the gym with me, helped me increase my strength, agility, and like just endurance. Really taught me through all of experience in the Marine Corps and in the Army, what to expect. So when I say like lead from the front, he really just kept me and my health and wellness and my career at the forefront of his mind to ensure that when I went into these challenges, I was prepared, adjust fire, so to speak, or pivot in tech terms, and continue moving forward. So that can show up in many different ways, whether it's being a great speaker or platoon your squad, but for him, his style of leadership was just straightforward. Over time, obviously, we built a relationship over the year, and I got him to laugh once in a while and smile and stuff like that. But I still think of him to this day. And I think he embodied everything that I learned in the military. Was essentially, regardless of what is on his plate, right? Because I wasn't his only soldier; he had a few more. He made sure that I did well, and that helped me kind of be where I'm at today. Whether I still utilize those principles or not, I think it's kind of ingrained in me. 20 years later.
When people are younger, right, I think it's always important to have mentors that are much older and have seen a lot more things than they have, right? I think a lot of times people kind of only have friend groups or connections that are only within their specific age group, and I think sometimes it becomes kind of a bubble in terms of or an echo chamber. So I think having kind of a positive male role model, whether they're strict or just generally have your best intentions at heart, I think those are really important personal and also even career building connections to have.
No, absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
What was the biggest learning curve transitioning from the military to civilian corporate life as a technical recruiter?
The biggest gap was, this is going to sound really funny, but just not being so professional. I still had it in me to say please and thank you and just be incredibly proper. And I realized quickly at Crunchyroll that wasn't the vibe, like I could just relax a little bit. So I think having that always on professionalism was hard to shake. And to this day, sometimes I still find myself talking to my kids like that, just out of nowhere, like I'm not standing attention, but like whatever the term is. But my son and I now, he's been teaching me how to salute for some reason. I think he saw it on YouTube. So it's bringing back some good memories. But I think, yeah, the hardest part was shedding that whole free to core, if you want to call it, and being a civilian, to be quite honest, like not having to operate in such a hyper vigilant, hyper professional mindset at all times.
Having the professionalism, I think, is always usually a good thing in kind of more unfamiliar situations, but I think it definitely does put like a guard between yourself and other people from an interactions perspective. So I think learning to be able to kind of relax a little bit, I think makes yourself much more open to other people and other possibilities. I do kind of want to move on to, this project that you're working on called the Talent Roadmap. I was wondering if you can kind of just give us the elevator pitch, 1 minute spiel, talk about what it does, right? Like what core problem, does the Talent Roadmap solve?
The Talent Roadmap started off as just an LLC that I needed to branch off into my own like solopreneurship. But I knew that I wanted to focus on documentation. So I built a job seeker playbook, basically took my processes in recruiting and reverse engineered them for job seekers. That was 2023. Tons of downloads, tons of coaching. I learned a lot from folks in that era or that year where hiring was just, or the job seeker was just abysmal. It's now morphed into a podcast where I interview folks and capture their best advice for technical roles and career advice for like engineers, HR folks, and like PMs, I believe. So that's another aspect of it. And then it morphed into like, hey, that's a great like subset of talent roadmap. But I think what I really want to do is take my original idea and expertise and experience from Crunchyroll and Camille and the things I've built there in Confluence and Coda to now, I wouldn't say open sourcing it, but I'm building templates and processes and playbooks that are digestible and going to open it up to the market pretty soon. So I built the job seeker playbook. I built the Notion ATS, which I think is pretty well done. I'm going to add on different components of the entire recruiting lifecycle into my Notion like Gumroad store. I really just want to share my knowledge in that form, things that I've done. And oftentimes when I have these conversations with hiring managers and founders, it's hard to really articulate why I want to do recruiting this way. And it took like an hour conversation for us to discuss this. But that's the next step for Talent Roadmap, to where I'm going to take all the 10 years of documentation that I've built across 3 different companies, and now 4 actually, and create digestible Notion playbooks for recruiters and founders in startup tech, seed and Series A, preferably seed. I actually picked up a couple clients that have found me by way of referral. Then I'm building out their entire recruiting and people ops Wikipedia wikis within Notion, helping them hire their first CTO and founding engineers, so on and so forth. And lastly, and over the next year, I'm going to see what sticks and what doesn't, and then launch my own startup around those specific needs in the market.
It just sounds like it's the culmination of all your experiences, and you wanted to kind of have it in a very simplified format that's easily accessible and digestible for CEOs or people hiring managers that maybe don't have documentation or practice like best practices in place.
What I want to test out is there a specific persona for a referral that comes into your interviewing pipeline, an inbound candidate, someone you actively source? Could those interviewing experiences differ a little bit to make it make sense, right? Because we can't necessarily do that nowadays with the interviewing processes we have or interviewing tools we have. Can we create custom hiring processes very quickly that match the needs and the vision and the style of the founding team, right? Because everyone does it differently. If I can solve that, then we build a culture of differentiation. I mean, it's already happening. People are building their own interviewing processes and putting them in like Google Sheets and Google Docs and just kind of having people like adhere to it. But I think there needs to be a tool out there that, quote unquote, could be the infrastructure of hiring. Even nowadays, calibrating with founders and hiring managers, and just it's still difficult. If I can somehow create a system around that to get founders over the initial hump, and then continue to add on different processes and modules and playbooks as they grow, it could alleviate a lot of friction.
How have you used AI to help build the talent roadmap? Have you considered using like AI agents like as well, or creating Henry Node AI bot, right? That basically takes those learnings and like kind of makes them much more accessible in a contextual format?
I mean, I haven't thought about that actually. One of my biggest downfalls is trying to get too deep into a technology. So I've stayed away from like trying to create my own bot. What I've done recently is I've gotten really good at using Canva, and they have an AI function that I've tested. I still rather do it, quote unquote, by hand. All of my assets, all of my design materials, everything that's basically UI has been done by me in Canva. Logos, YouTube placeholders, and all of my content on LinkedIn is done in Canva. And if you see the initial like versioning of it, you're like, wow, that was pretty poor choice of color concepts and style guides and stuff. But I learned over the last 2 years like what kind of made sense for me as a brand. I've done some vibe coding, if you want to call that, and like Windsurf and Replit and V0, but that's very specific for the company I'm trying to start. I wanted to get an MVP out. I wasn't too like concerned with like the UI itself, but they actually V0 specifically produced a really good V1 of my startup, which I can share with you offline, but it's really impressive. I'm really happy with it.
I've explored recently a little bit of, I guess, vibe coding with Replit. It does a really good job of creating the V1s, like you mentioned. And it just got me thinking about, what a team is going to look like in the next year or two or 2 years, right? Like, obviously, there's a lot of possibilities and creativity that comes with vibe coding, and it's really powerful. But if you were to do anything personal, like, hey, create a username and password or sign in with your Google account, link information, company sensitive or external information into this particular template or whatever, like you still kind of have to know the ins and outs, right, of how to securely secure all your information. And if someone who's not a technical person, like a non-technical person, that seems kind of dangerous. There's a lot of doom and gloom about like, AI is going to come for jobs and it's going to reduce the workforce. But I think the more positive angle and more optimistic outlook is really more about how much value can it bring to, instead of thinking about it as like reduction, think about more as abundance and a new form of value. But at the same time, you do need to know, actually, it actually is really meant for a world of generalists. You have to know all the different parts of how something works and where to spot all of the potential mistakes or pitfalls and things like that. Yes, you can have the AI agent. You basically have to tell it multiple times, like, please fix this, make sure this is fixed or whatever. But you have to actually know what problems that need to be fixed, where are the vulnerabilities in the code. Right? And if you don't know that, then it's actually quite dangerous to kind of launch something without the kind of proper security measures in place.
Yeah, when you said, abundance and like AI being, catered to like generalists, I was thinking about that this morning. Like, there's no way I would have been able to build this prototype on my own. I would have had to hire folks, within my network or some platform, spend some money. So I think what's cool about AI is like there's a self-learning pathway now. Like if you want to learn how to code, you can use AI and free code camp to kind of maybe cater to your own learning curves. So rather than just using one specific pathway, you now have multiple sources like to customize your own learning path. Yeah, you make a good point about security and responsibility, and I think that's going to continue to be a theme.
I think all teams kind of moving forward, whether you're in a marketing, well, definitely obviously an engineering team, you're going to have coders that can validate things and fix things and know what problems to fix ahead of time. But I even think for non-engineering teams, let's say like a recruiting team or a marketing team, they're actually all going to need at least one engineer, right? Like you need someone to be able to point out, because you need someone who's going to be able to point out the deficiencies in code, or if you need to hook up, information from the company into this thing that you're, imagining or vibe coding. In order to bring it to life, it has to go through some sort of sanitation, right, or QA to make sure that it can actually be implemented, at scale. At least if you're using it for like internal purposes or even externally, right? Like how do you make sure you can hook up external data sources like securely? Like that all requires, an engineer.
This came to mind now. I think the opportunity with AI could possibly be where instead of having we call a YC funded startup that makes unicorn status that grows to 12,000 employees over the next decade, what if AI could allow us to create 500 startups that are successful of an employee base of like 40 and allow folks to kind of spend 5 to 10 years there? Like, could that be like the next cycle of how employment looks or works? And not to say that we're going back to the days where you're working 40 years for some company, but what if there could be 50 like with people like myself and yourself that have these ideas that can't necessarily start their own company because we're non-technical and whatever the variables may be. But what if there's a bunch of us out there that just want to solve a very specific problem in our own life, create a successful company around that, and hire 25 folks that typically just maintain that company until profitability and profit sharing or an exit to where we get acquired. I think that'd be really cool to see, spreading the wealth, so to speak, smaller successful companies being built by non-technical founders.
You're going to see a lot of small teams that, as long as they have complementary kind of experiences, that you can actually just launch a bunch of different ideas with some payment method, as long as obviously information secure, etc. Right? And you're going to try to see what works, and then you can kind of build startup ideas, off of that. What I do want to see is like people within companies actually build just building their own agents, like, just for fun, right? Or just their own projects, and then being able to share and talk about what they did, how they went about prompting, what are the pros and cons, the things that they had to fix, just so that, like, one, it allows for a creative outlet, but also it allows just for an MVP to be shared, built, discussed upon, to see if, like, is this something that can be help improve something within a business? Can it elevate a business if we were to put, actual resources to it? Because oftentimes if you had an idea, maybe you just could never get the resources to even have a proof of concept, to even talk about it. Or let's say, hey, I want to talk to an engineer and I have an idea of like what feature should be implemented. I can just use an agent, right? And say like, I would like the feature to be represented in this way, right? And like you can actually describe it, find references, and then that way, you can hand it off to, a product designer or UI UX person, and they can talk about the pros and cons. They can look at the actual code of how something, was designed, and it just enables much clearer communication and expectations of what somebody would like, and they can talk about whether it's realistic to implement or not. But at least it cuts down on the ambiguity by a lot.
Yes, yeah, I've seen that real time for sure. Most recently with a JavaScript engineer slash solution engineer friend of mine who had to, you know, debug the prototype I built. So yeah, it's happening.
Outside of your profession, how are you using AI in your daily life?
You know what? My daughter always has, like, we have conversations about just things, right? And now I'm using ChatGPT to find the answer rather than Google, which is interesting. Small things like, riddles and fun facts, so on and so forth. Yeah, I can't think of any use case right now where I'm actively using AI, at least that I know of, my personal life. That's a really interesting question. And I'm gonna like actively monitor that as I'm going through my day to see what I do. Very cool.
I think once you start diving into kind of the AI agents and the MCP, that stuff will really help empower what you could build and integrate it into your personal life in terms of kind of building like repeatable functions, repeatable apps that tie in more contextually with daily life or what you're going through. Let's say if you're running or whatever, right? Like it can give you better, more optimized and personalized contextual information.
I keep an eye and mind on that.
Last question that I wanted to ask, any books that you're currently reading?
Oh man, it has been a while since I picked up an actual book. I am rereading or re-listening to, gosh, the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. And the Almanac of Naval Ravikant is just, man, I just align so much with his way of living, right? Whether it's business and tech, solving world problems. When I say world, I don't mean like the entire world, but like my world and things that I'm interested in. And simultaneously, How Not to Die by Dr. Michael. I always forget his last name, but those two things are important to me, right? Health. I'm 40 years old, turning 41 next month. Holy smokes. So those are the two books that I'm listening to. If I were to, now that you asked about the reading portion, if I were to pick up a book to read, it would probably be like a language learning book. I've been trying to learn like Vietnamese, French, and Spanish over the last handful of years, and I have actual books that can teach me. I'm trying to like find a way to like spend time doing that.
You don't think Duolingo is good enough just for language learning?
I like it, but I like it on the web better because I'm able to type. I hate typing with my fingers. I mean, Duolingo's great. I haven't retained much. I've actually taken courses on like Patreon from a guy named Bookmap. He's a blogger on Instagram and he's super funny. And I've actually tried hiring an actual coach from Vietnam, and that was the most successful, but it was the most time consuming, right? So I figured a book with a YouTube video could be the mediums I need to learn the way I want to learn. My dad's offered to like chat with me and talk to me on Facebook Messenger. I don't know. I just feel like I haven't found the exact solution for me personally on how to learn a language very quickly. I've actually been looking up some things like, hey, how can I learn a language in 3 weeks? What's the best, most immersive experience? So I guess you're using Duolingo as well. And
I'm not a very firm believer in Duolingo, in all honesty. I think it's more aspirational than it is, I think, informative. I mean, it basically deconstructs like a language textbook, like the basic language textbook, and it's more of a game, right? And it's a fun game. And yes, you do learn a little bit, but ask anyone who's taken Duolingo, how did they fare when they went to a country and actually used it? Most of the time, I would imagine it's like, yeah, it'll get you the basics, but like to have an actual conversation, it's pretty difficult. And it'll probably be more of like a textbook speech versus kind of more like natural speech. So I think that's kind of my opinion, like on the Duolingo portion. To your point about immersion, honestly, the best way to learn, and I'm assuming you probably maybe have some basics, already down, right? Is just spend more time in Vietnam, right? Like where you're forced to use it, like English, like yes, I'm sure English is a little bit more accessible than it was in the past or slightly used, but probably not as prevalent as if you were to go to any Little Saigon, Garden Grove here in California. Just being immersed in the country and being forced to use it, you'll just pick up so many mannerisms, different words, different phrases. One of my friends actually just came back and, she grew up here and no one's going to teach you the word for credit card or contactless payment. New words and new technologies that were invented, recently that maybe their parents, right, like never had to learn like or use, but the language changes over time just given technological and societal advances.
So you make a great point because every time, so I live here in downtown Oakland. Every time I'm in like Little Saigon, I feel like more comfortable actually trying to speak because it's already all around me. And I'm half Cambodian, so I most recently went to a Cambodian restaurant called Battambang, which is my first time there. And immediately I just started opening up with mine. It was almost like programmed to do that with another human, right? The downfall is I'm not there every day, right? I think I may go back to like a live tutor and just really focus on maybe a story that we can just memorize together rather than like foundational concepts and acts and stuff. I think that might go that route.
It's got to be a mix of having the basics to express yourself and then you got to be throw yourself in the fire because you got to be able to hear the actual responses that people will say based on what you're saying. It's almost like it's like a role-playing script. Like if you go to a restaurant and you say a certain phrase, you know that they'll probably ask, do you want X, Y, or Z with that? Is it, I don't know, I'm just using an example like spicy, not spicy. If you don't expect those things, then just hearing it for the first time is like a shock. Like there's an emotional shock and you're not prepared for it. And a lot of these places, they're not, especially Asian places, they're not willing to wait. They'll just be like, they'll just switch immediately to English. Like, you're wasting my time. I got to go to another table to wait or whatever. You got to get the reps in. You got to do the work. I call them positive traumatic experiences only because like, you'll remember them. You're like, oh, I should have said this word. Or it's like, oh, that's what they were saying. They were just saying it really fast. And the more reps you get into it, kind of like working out, like you'll catch on eventually, but maybe the first couple of times it'll be a little bit of a struggle, but those are the things that you'll remember.
Dude, it's so funny. Positive traumatic experiences. I like that a lot.
All right, Henry, I want to thank you for coming on to this show. Where can my listeners find you and where can they find the talent roadmap?
Dude, it's been fun, man. Yeah, thanks for having me. I try to stay pretty consistent across my handles on social. I'm primarily on LinkedIn, so /HNGO Tech, TECH. That's also my website, hngotech.card.co. And Talent Roadmap primarily is on YouTube, so /Talent Roadmap. HNO Tech is me as an individual, Talent Roadmap is the entity. So that's the three locations you can find me. And any one of those locations will branch off into like the other one. So if you find one, you'll find the other two. They're pretty linked in that manner. Yeah, that's really it. I keep it simple. That's where I live online.
All right. Thanks, Henry. Really appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.